Anne Thacker is a native of Lismore, and she graduated from the University of Queensland with a Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Arts. And she has worked as a solicitor in Lismore, Sydney, Melbourne, and various other places. She has also lectured at Leo Cusson Institute, Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Southern Cross University, and Griffith University. In 1999, Anne was the editor of the Queensland Law Society publication, The Law Office Guide, Volume 2, Litigation Precedents. In 2003, she co-authored Women in the Law, and most recently, in 2021, she edited branches of the Cedar Tree, which you've referred to, Julie. This book has been reprinted a number of times, most recently this year. In March 2000, Anne was appointed a magistrate of the Magistrates Court of Queensland. She has been a long-term member of the ALHS and has been an active member on the board. This is only a very small glimpse of what of Anne's accomplishments. So I'm not going to spend half the time talking about her. She's very accomplished and a specialist in this area, I think. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Anne.
Oh, well, thank you, Yusuf. They're very kind words. I'm not sure about being an expert, but I'm certainly an enthusiast. And so I thank you for asking me to speak about water as the theme for the New South Wales History Week this year. And Lismore, of course, you can see from the map, is just into the north part of New South Wales. I'm hoping that during the afternoon, Munira Saad joins us because she's from Taree. Can people see my arrow?
Yes.
Well, Taree's down further, just north of Sydney, for those that might not know. And she will speak about her understanding of the floods in Taree more recently at the beginning of this year as well. But we'll wait and see about that. My talk this afternoon is remembering the Lebanese in New South Wales, but particularly around Lismore, as floods did and have and are impacting their lives. But the presentation I'm giving is focusing on North Lismore, which is where I grew up, and other members of the Far North Coast branch of the society still live. And I make special mention of Regina. Regina, I can't see you at the moment, but I know you're online. Regina Henson is the president of the Far North Coast branch of the society. The Lebanese writing, I think everyone else can see what that says. Men fakir el Lebnanin. It should be spelled another in here, or el Faydon, and people can correct my pronunciation because I'm only learning Arabic. The early days, from a little after white people had settled in New South Wales, the newspapers started, of course, recording events of flooding. And this is an example of a flooding event in around Taree on the Manning River in 1929. It was reported by a fellow called Fitzpatrick, but what he does is he refers back to floods previous to 1929. He headed his article "The Big Flood of 1866" so that he can compare this terrible flood that had occurred in February of 29. He says it was 18 inches to 2 feet lower than the 1886 flood. So the 1929 flood of the Manning River, he's saying, has to be remembered that the floodwater today has a much better chance of getting away than was the case in 1866, when there was much timber to be passed through and the water would naturally back up to a much greater extent than is the case today. I've included as much as would fit on the slide from the article because it also shows a flavour of the time. His next paragraph says, "It has pleased the Almighty Disposer of human events to visit the Manning with the most fearful display of his power it has ever been our lot to witness. A week ago, people spoke of the Great Flood of 1857. So there's another flood that occurred since white settlement. People spoke of the Great Flood of 1857 as the river rose 8 feet above the level of that 1857 flood. And then he reverts back to what is occurring in 1929. From everywhere down the river, we've heard one unvarying story of desolation and ruin. In scores of cases, probably hundreds, families are left without a roof to shelter their heads, crops, cattle, furniture, everything destroyed. Fortunately, so far as we have heard, there's been no loss of life, although there were some very narrow escapes."
Did you end up getting that rose ball the other day?
The which? No, we didn't. We left.
Huh?
Sorry, can I
Oh,
ask everyone to be on mute because there's a lot of background noise. Thanks. Sorry,
thank you.
and
I turn now to casino family histories. I thought a good example was part of the story of Joseph Bracs, the great grandfather of Regina Henson, who still lives in Queens. Regina still lives in Casino. You can get the details of the Bracs dynasty story in Branches of the Cedar Tree, the book we were talking about just before. Joseph Bracs migrated to Australia with his sister, and in 1894, Joseph commenced hawking from Sydney, and he nearly drowned crossing the river I've just been talking about, the Manning River at Taree. Partly because of that, on the 3rd of March in 1903, after he had married, he took the paddle steamer, which was operating up the New South Wales coast, called the Tom Kai, to Ballina. They settled in North Lismore and had a successful business keeping a shop there, but of course experienced floods and in their case also 2 fires. So by 1922 they abandoned attempts to live at North Lismore. They moved to their farm at Teresa Creek west of Casino, and happily 100 years later some members of the family still live there. And there's a very nice photograph of Joseph Bracs that was sourced by Regina. In North Lismore, just as an example, here are some of the names of Lebanese residents who were living there in the late 19th century and right up until relatively recently. And in the case of the Hajjars in particular, even more recently than that. One of the last members of their family passed away in North Lismore just recently, Barbara Ryan's great aunt. No, aunt, not great aunt, aunt. So there was my family, the Abudi Zahluts and the Wickhams. The Habibs moved to South Lismore and were responsible for starting the Lismore Airport. And I could go through some of those other names. People might recognise them. There's some very interesting stories attached to many of those names, again in the branches of the Cedar Tree book. So far as flooding in North Lismore is concerned, here is an example of the kind of talk that people did. This is an entry from a special book by Dorothy Edwards called Lismore's Corner Shops, because there were, like many country towns, many corner shops around Lismore, including in North Lismore, where my great-grandmother, Nancy Aboody Wickham, built a corner shop. And then when my mother and my father, Barbara and George Thacker, moved from Brisbane, well, they got married and moved from Brisbane to live in Lismore, they took over the shop and service station, Thacker's Service Centre. They were very young, and I'm interested to see recorded here, I didn't realise they opened the business on the 16th of September 1957, which is my birthday. And I'm the eldest of 7. And my mother had me when she was a mere 24 years old. So they had a very busy young married life. My father recorded on a piece of the wall, and Mum's written to Dorothy Edwards about it. One flood came 3 feet into the shop. It tipped the counter fridge over. George had notches to mark the flood levels on the door jamb. 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, suicide. So that was a terrible and regular event, but not quite so bad as the 1954 flood, which would have occurred before this shop and service centre were built in 1957. That's my parents' first car, little Hillman car. The shop doesn't quite look as peaky as it does in that photograph, but it is still there, and I'm not sure what they use it for. It's not a service station anymore. I think Mobil don't do that sort of service anymore. But that's a photograph of the shop and service station in the early 60s. Around the corner from the shop at the back of North Lismore is a memory from Barbara Roberts. Her family were the Hajjars. She wrote this short story about living in North Lismore. Floods were ever present, she says, when I was living and growing up in North Lismore during the 1960s and 70s. The Hajjar Ryan household was in Barrow Lane. It was separated from the Wilson River by a road and a paddock, so it was easy to watch the changes in the river when the heavy rains came. The river would start flowing faster, the brown waters breaking the banks and moving across the paddock toward our houses. Luckily, my parents had raised our house onto stilts, like many Lismore houses. Before I was born, that had occurred. So the floodwaters usually flowed under our house rather than through it. But my father told a story of the 1954 flood before the house was raised. This was one of the worst floods in Lismore's history before it was topped by the 2022 disastrous flood event. Dad said that the 1954 flood arrived so quickly that he was woken from his nap in his lounge chair by the water lapping at his feet. He had to quickly string ropes between our low house and the neighbour's higher raised house to get my pregnant mother across the fast-moving current between the houses to safety in the neighbour's house, along with their other 2 young children. It must have been so scary. I heard similar stories from the 2022 flood. Anyway, Barbara remembers that neighbours and cousins would come to stay with us in our high house during floods, and there would be 2 or 3 children in each single bed on these nights. Boats would go along our street in front of the houses, rescuing people, animals, or dropping off supplies. I recall seeing livestock floating down the river, along with huge logs and other rubbish, hoping they didn't head our way. In my young mind, it was fun and adventurous, but in reality, of course, the adults must have been worried sick while they waited for the river height to finally peak. The flood smell afterwards, as the waters receded, was so bad that the memory of it stays with you forever. My aunt Eva Hadjar had a lingerie shop in the town, and of course it flooded like the Lismore CBD is prone to doing. The flood left behind in her shop, and the smell is another strong memory because my aunt always conned us nieces and nephews to help clean up. And as that was the best photograph that Barbara could give to me of their house, but you can see the staircase and how high it had been raised from its original ground level. That's her brother in the photo, and again it was taken in the early 1960s. My own memory of the rains dominating our lives around Lismore. I've recorded here one night my grandmother, Nancy Wickham-Aboody, turned up in the dark, sopping wet. Her car had broken down and she'd walked in the rain from Tuncester through North Lismore to South Lismore, where we lived then because my father ran the power station. My mother said, "I'll run you a warm bath." But Nana said, "No, just give me a towel for now. And George's dressing gown, Peyton Places on the TV." And it shows rain was an everyday part of our lives and largely to be ignored. And that's a photograph from about that time of my grandmother and my mother, Barbara Aboody Thacker. These are parts of the stories that are recorded in our book. This is the book, in case people weren't aware, that we keep referring to, Branches of the Cedar Tree, Lebanese on the New South Wales Far North Coast. And they're inclusive of stories from not just around Lismore, but from the Queensland border south to right down to Grafton, where Julie Sweeten, that's where your family's story is in there. Most of the Lismore Lebanese settlers established along and around Terania Street, North Lismore. But sadly, the 2022 floods have seen a radical change to the viability of North Lismore and some other parts of Lismore, but in particular North Lismore. I found this information as a comparative off the Lismore Council website, and you can see the highest flood at the top in the red, 14.36 metres on the 28th of February 2022. It's on the left-hand side of the screen, 2022. But I've also written off, as you can see, all of the other floods back to, or the major flooding records, back to 1887. And each of the years that there has been a flood, including in 1954 during the Queen's visit, and 1974 was another major flood, 1989 into the 2000s, and topped by this over 12-metre flood in well, the first flood was on the 21st of, no, where is the first flood? The first flood was 11.4 metres on the 30th of March 2022, and the highest one was only a few days beforehand, a month beforehand, on the 28th of February 2022. This might be an easier graph to look at because it shows that devastating flood from 2022 in red, and the other dark blue floods peaking at over 10 metres, with all of the other floods over the years. So it has been a regular feature of living in Lismore. But the 2022 floods were catastrophic. As I say, the first flood on the 28th of February was the highest at 14.4 metres in the town, roughly 2 metres higher than any other flood in recorded colonial history, and 3 metres higher than the more recent flood in 2017. Then there was the second flood before people could get back on their feet on the 30th of March in 2022. So in Lismore General, about 5,000 homes were damaged. An estimated 12 to 14,000 people were displaced. The entire CBD and industrial zones were wiped out because they have all been, or the vast majority of them have been in North and South Lismore. And since then, the governments, both Commonwealth and state, have announced an $800 million fund to begin the mammoth task of relocating, raising and or retrofitting homes in the flood-prone areas. In North Lismore, this is an old photograph of 86 Terania Street, North Lismore, which is my family home. You can see from this photograph that the houses there were not all that high off the ground. Some were raised higher over the years since. This photo was probably taken in the 1960s, I think. Next door to the left is Lewis Hadjar's house. It seems to be slightly higher than our house. And the house on the right, you can't see it, but it's about the same height as well, but not high enough for a car to go underneath. So not very high, and therefore in jeopardy of floods. And in the 2022 flood would have been like this. This is a photograph of showing the another part of Lismore. It's Trinity College, which was entirely destroyed by the flood. It's the Catholic school. On the left, if you can see in the bottom left corner, is what used to be the co-ed year 11, year 12 building of the Morris Brothers, which was on the right, and St Mary's over the hill. All of them, all three schools, including the primary school, were devastated by this flood, and they have not returned even now in 2025. They're not returning to this massive school site that you can see. In the middle of the photograph, if you can see my pointer, that's the local corner shop. And just beyond that is the beginning of High Street, which takes people up well above the basin. Lismore is really like a saucepan, and you can just see the lip of the saucepan in the top left-hand corner of this photograph. And that water that's around the central CBD area would have been exactly like that, right up and over roofs in North Lismore as well. This is another photograph that some people will have seen on the television. This is one of the main streets through Lismore, and covering over on the left-hand side, beyond those trees, is the Lismore Shopping Centre that was built after the 1974 flood, and at that time it was built intending to be above flood height, but as a consequence of the rain in 2022, it too was flooded right up into the shopping centre. As a consequence of the 2022 flood, this is a very happy photo, in my opinion. This photograph is of 4 houses that have been moved from North Lismore and relocated very high beyond Gunnellabar, if people know the suburbs of Lismore, but very high up on the top of the range that surrounds Lismore. And they're finished now with fill-in underneath for carports. You can see they've only just finished them. They've only moved 4 so far out of North Lismore. There was some controversy, I'm told, from some of the people living in this new suburb, because this new suburb only contained brick-built buildings, and they were worried about, I don't know, something to do with the way wooden buildings might look when deposited. So they tried 4, but it does seem to have been a success. And I'm sorry I didn't get down to Lismore to take a more recent photograph. I took that photograph at the end of last year. If you can see, I'm hoping the map is big enough. Here on the left of it's a photograph of Lismore. On the left here is my old family home, 86 Terania Street in North Lismore. And the blue line, of course, from Google shows how you go through Lismore over the river, the joinder of the 2 rivers, up through Lismore Heights. I'm pointing now to just where the school was that I spoke about, just there. Oops, oh no. How do I go back? Just there where I was speaking about before the school. Go up through Lismore Heights, go up through Gunnellabar, and come to where the houses have been put from North Lismore. You can see here with the Woolworths sign. On the other side of the road up here is where the Lismore City Council buildings now are. So essentially, Lismore has moved from the conjunction of the 2 rivers up here to Gunnellabar, and there are these new suburbs relatively new suburbs like Chilcott's Grass developing very, very high above the rivers. For some people who might not know, I'm talking about 2 rivers. It used to be called the Richmond River North Arm and South Arm, but about 10 years ago now, the South Arm was renamed the Wilson River. The problem for Lismore has always been that in the early days, it was a very good access, the highest up the river for transport, because overland transport was so very far and difficult from Sydney. But the difficulty is that Lismore is at the juncture. You can't quite see it behind the Mells word on the map. But Lismore joins the Wilson River, now called, and the Richmond River, which is why so much water comes down out of the Great Dividing Range and swamps and really fills up like a saucepan the entire Lismore area, except for this little knob of a hill called Gerard's Hill. So it becomes an island. And so Chilcott's Grass is something like a 15-minute drive up the hill from North Lismore and well out of harm's way from floods. As a consequence of the devastation to North Lismore, a wonderful project has been commenced by a team of people from the Southern Cross University, that's the university that's centred in Lismore. the history department, headed by Professor Adele Wessel, and her team, commenced this, what they call Living Lab project, to capture and publish stories of North Lismore before they're lost. Many people generously shared with the project their experiences to preserve the sense of place and belonging, as well as keeping the history of North Lismore as best as possible. The project started last year. The project this year did an exhibition in that which they put up in the CBD area, called Living Memory, and it was the repository of the stories, memories, histories that they were able to pull together, and they presented those stories as a celebration of North Lismore, knowing that now that it must and is transitioning from what was a residential neighbourhood to its new future. This is the poster that was used to invite people to join the exhibition in one of the main streets in Lismore. On the left here is a very interesting photograph, because the person in the middle is not my sister Ellen on the right. She is not our sister. She is the photographer. And happily, Shireen Farhad, and she was very surprised and enthusiastic when she discovered that we were Lebanese, because, as you can probably tell, she's Lebanese as well. So that was a really happy meeting. She lives in and works in Sydney as a historian photographer. A large part of the Living Memory exhibition is portraits, but also recorded interviews and other pieces of memorabilia contributed by North Lismore residents, offering a snapshot of how life in North Lismore was. Here's a photograph of the shop where they set up the exhibition. Down one wall were all the portraits of people. Along the table down the middle is very detailed history and documents and photographs related to the history of North Lismore. There's a close-up of what it looked like for the portraits taken, including the current minister, which I'll get to in a moment. On the other wall, there are plaques like this one, advertising and explaining in brief the interviews that were conducted. This interview between Barbara Roberts and Hajjaz, and Ellen Thacker, Aboody Wickham's, and Regina Henson. Regina, they spelt your name wrong. Was a 13-minute interview, and they were able to record their memories of living in North Lismore and the understanding they have of the history of the Lebanese community, who first settled in North Lismore from the late 19th century. Because they were a heavy presence in North Lismore. They owned most of the businesses. There were other people living in North Lismore, especially Italians, because they came as farmers, and Indians, not so many, and the original people, the Aboriginal people, also were living in North Lismore, at least when I was there as a child, and still, because I know some of those people still live there. It was a heavy Catholic community with the flying nuns as the teachers, the Daughters of Charity, they were called. And on Sundays, the Italians would all come in from their farms for church. It was so popular that the priests in North Lismore, there were two for many, many years, and they were always supplied from Italy and spoke at least one or two of the masses on Sunday in Italian for the Italian community. But of course, because of the White Australia policy in particular, the Lebanese community were frantically pretending to be Irish Catholics and never made any different contribution in terms of church. They just simply attended the Catholic school and the Catholic church. This is a little quote at the bottom here from Barbara Roberts. I think when you were little, everything you needed was in North Lismore. All your relatives and friends. It was a community. And it, as I said before, it really was, because there were so many Lebanese settlers there and they banded together for their mutual benefit. This is the Minister Janelle Saffin, who is also an ex-resident of North Lismore, but currently she's the member of the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, member for Lismore, Minister for Small Business, Minister for Recovery, and she spoke at the opening of the exhibition, and you'll see very happily she spruiked a copy of our book, which helped us to sell a few copies of the book at the exhibition. So that's been very good. She's also the Minister for the North Coast. And thank you everyone for listening to me. Teslame Kelwahad Menam Yesamo Lana, if I pronounce it correctly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. What a fascinating presentation. Anne, could I ask you to stop sharing?
How do I do that?
There should be at the top of your screen, there should be stop.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go.
Okay, so now we can see everyone who's who's in the presentation. And it was really a fascinating presentation, and I'm just gobsmacked by how many floods there were.
Unbelievable. When you start to actually look and see, you realize how for a long time, I think people just went along with it and thought the water comes up, the water goes down, you hose it out and you carry on. But since the 2022 flood, that's simply not viable.
I'm going to open the floor up for questions. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. We've got one in the chat, Anne, and that's from Marina. And she asked, where do all the students go to school when the schools were flooded in 2022 and they haven't reopened yet?
Well, that's a very good question, because it contrasts with what they do or have done now with what we did when we were at school. What has occurred since the 2022 flood is that the university, Southern Cross University, which is up the hill toward Canelabar and well out of flood, they have allowed Trinity College to simply start school there. And so school operates out of Southern Cross University and will do so for the foreseeable future, as far as I understand, which is a heavy contrast with what happened when we were at school, which was the school would go into overdrive. The students would be instructed specifically to do jobs. Every carpet tile in the school was marked on the back with a number, and we had to pick them up in a certain order and carry them up upstairs. And then after the flood, when volunteers would come and hose out, we would then have to put them all back again. Chairs, tables, carpet squares, and life would go on. It was it was something you did as a student of the school, and the parents would come and help. Yeah.
Wow. Herculean task.
But the funniest thing I remember was toward the end of school, one year we were laughing. Actually, I think I was in first year uni. I heard it on the radio that the nuns in the convent were in trouble because they had very recent. This is the 1974 flood. The nuns had put in a lift for the older nuns in the convent, but in the flood, the mechanism didn't work properly for some reason to do with the water, and the lift was going down to the basement, filling up with water, going up to the top floor and opening, and the water was going all through the top floor of the convent. And
Wow.
I don't know how long it took, but I remember it being reported on the news that it was creating havoc, as you could imagine, with the floodwaters going where they weren't supposed to be.
Wow. Fascinating. Can I open it up to others who have questions? We'll go with Violet first, and then Anne Monsul, and then Dan, and then Emil. Violet, you got to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I forgot about that. Thanks. And when you showed the map of Lismore, and basically it seems like the dead centre of Lismore is the area that was flooded, but the surrounding areas were higher. Firstly, is that correct interpretation of Lismore? The flooded area was the centre of the town? Is
Yes,
that right?
the
Right.
flooded area.
So I'm assuming way back when the Lebanese first were settling there in the late 1800s, early 1900s, like any town, people would always start out in the centre because the centres were small. They hadn't grown so much by that stage. Would it be fair to say that almost all of the Lebanese lived in that central floodable area originally?
That's right.
That's where they were?
The whole town was in the flood area originally because they were heavily reliant on the river as transport.
Mhm.
And the Lebanese people lived on one side of the river, the North Lismore side, and there are what's called double bridges. They're still there, the double bridges over the Wilson and the Richmond River. And so you would have to go over the bridge to get into the town centre. There's very good stories in the Branches of the Cedar Tree book about the businesses that moved from North Lismore into the centre of town as they became more successful. The Skype family owned Woodlark Street, really, were terribly successful in town. There's a little bit about already this afternoon, you've heard a little bit about the Hadjars. They were another very successful family of different sorts of businesses, menswear, lingerie, and I know some others, I can't remember their names for the minute, but anyway, they did move from North Lismore into the centre of town as they became more established and branched out.
Right. So those ones that were more successful or were successful to start with in the town, obviously that success would have meant more tragedy and heartache when the floods occurred. But what I would like to know is, obviously we know that since 2022, people are moving away, but it seems like there were many floods, in the 40s and 1940s, 50s, etc. Did the Lebanese families, which probably would have included your own family, did they tend to start moving away then to higher ground? Or did they all just accept, that this, we're going to just move on in the same place and keep going? Was there any sense of migration?
That hasn't been something that I have been able to discover in a lot of detail. But to this extent, I know there were those that left and those that stayed. My own family, for example, owned that shop, the corner shop in the main street of North Lismore. But when it came time for my parents to find a house to live in, they built their house right up very high on High Street. They didn't build in North Lismore. And I think that's a fairly typical experience.
Thank you. Good.
And Monsu?
I have a couple of questions, but if I can just say very briefly to the question that Violet asked, there were some families like the Lutfi family who had a very successful horse and cart business in Lismore, and after the flood, they decided to move north into Queensland, and ironically, they moved to Gayndah, and they were there for the flooding of the Burnett. So that was a bit
And
of
I think it's not just the flood either that people were moving for. The Lebanese settlement from the 1880s through to the early 1920s were using horses and wagons, and then moving to horse and cart, and then like Barbara, the Hadjar family, moving to using cars. And once the businesses were moving towards using cars, because it became dangerous to use horse and cart once cars were on the road. They moved toward. They had enough behind them as well. They could move to businesses wherever, and it was still difficult to get things from Sydney. So people did gravitate to Brisbane, and they started spreading out to all the places we now know.
So my actual question is, you mentioned when you were talking about the church attendance that Lebanese sought to be invisible. So when this project was occurring, the Living Lab project, was there a surprise on the part of the people who were carrying out the project that in fact there'd been quite a sizable Lebanese settlement there in North Lismore? Could you speak to that, Anne?
Yes, I can speak to that because it was shocking. One of my sisters, Ellen Thacker, lives in Lismore, and she went along to the first meetings, and was shocked that nobody knew that the Lebanese people had even been there. And she said, "What about the Lebanese people?" And they said, "Who are they?" And so she had to actually do quite a bit of work to raise the awareness of this group of people, a significant group of people in the North Lismore that would otherwise have been completely forgotten. So the Australian Lebanese Historical Society has proved its worth in maintaining proper history. And once the people, especially Professor Wessel, once they realised, they were they were so interested and embracing. It was fantastic to be drawn in to the project and given such a prominent position in the project, in the photography and the documents and the stories that they gathered about the Lebanese settlers and what happened after the Lebanese established themselves in North Lismore and Lismore, but North Lismore because that's the focus of the project.
Thanks, Anne. I did have can I ask another question?
One more, and then we'll go to
I'll
Emil.
combine this one. So since the last flood, was there still a population of first Australians in North Lismore? And if so, where are they going? Plus, is there an acknowledgement that climate change has perhaps had some impact here? I really appreciated your explanation as to why the flooding occurs. I thought that was a really clear explanation, and I understand now why Lismore has so many floods. But is climate change considered an issue, and where are the first Australians moving to?
Look, I've never been able to work out whether whether they don't believe it or they don't want to talk about it. I know that when we were first invited by Professor Wessel to talk about Lebanese settlement in North Lismore, and they were putting together some preliminary there's been other activities around this project, but we weren't allowed to talk about some of the stories out loud. And when we said why not, the answer, can you believe it, was that I'm not sure who it was, but the authorities were worried that by talking about what happened to people in the flood, they would cause fear and alarm, and post-traumatic stress disorder might rear its head, and so talking about the impact of the flood on the people was managed in a very delicate way, which makes it difficult to know what the full story is, whether it's attached fully to climate change or whether it's attached to something else. I'm just not sure. But I think it's very clear from the number of people who have decided they simply can't live in North Lismore anymore. That gives an indication, I think, that it's climate change accepted. Of course, there still are some people who are committed to remaining in North Lismore, and that too has been impacted more recently by not a flood but by a fire. The important high school for that whole area of Lismore, Richmond River High School, was in flood, has always been in flood, but they were talking about rejuvenating it despite where it is. But at the beginning of this year, a devastating fire annihilated it. So that's the end of the high school in North Lismore, and I think that will have an impact as well. So that's not a very good answer, but it's the only one I've been able to sort of piece together from those different experiences of dealing with post-2022 flood. I mean, we laughed when, amongst ourselves, we laughed and said, well, it's just another flood, isn't it? But it really hasn't been just another flood. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Emil, you had a
Yes,
question?
thank you, Joseph. And wonderful talk. You bring back a lot of memories, having grown up in Gloucester, New South Wales, and gone to school in Maitland. We lived with floods. I always remember Dad's panic always was to move the stock up from the lower shelves to the higher shelves, and we all bogged in to help. But my memory as a child particularly was to the role that the army played, and these huge, as a child they looked huge, army ducks floating in the water down the main street of the town. Was that the case more recently in the 2022 floods?
If you remember the photograph I showed you of one of the main streets with all the little boats,
yes,
the 2022 flood came so fast that there was a surprise, and there was no help apart from people getting in their own dinghies and going out to help of their own volition. It came too fast for the authorities to really gather any. I don't know of any input of the army until after.
Thank you.
Um, Thank you, Dan, Emil. I can see that Munira has joined us. Munira, are you there? And we'll be finishing in a minute. Just bear with me. Okay. Munira may not be on her phone on the phone. I can take one more question if anyone has any burning questions. Otherwise, we'll end it there if not. Oh, Munira, you're there. And you're on mute. Munira, you need to
Yeah.
unmute.
Can you hear me
Munira,
now?
yeah.
Yeah.
Munira, when we first started, Anne thought that you might like to give a very brief overview of the recent floods in Taree.
Absolutely.
Julie has also shared with us very briefly the constant flooding in Grafton. So if you just want to give us a small snapshot before we finish about Taree.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and talking about how quickly this flood has come in 22 for North Lismore. This flood for us, which happened back in March, it came very quick and caught people unaware to get time to move out. So our river has came up to 7 meters high, which has never been that high in the past flood that we've had. So a lot of homes along the river in the middle of town and were very badly affected and fully covered up. So they've had to get people off their roof. They had to get people, off their away, running away from wherever they could get a section that they be saved by, to get them by boat across. And the business people houses were very badly affected because the way the river has come, if anyone knows Taree and knows the park along the river that come up into one of the main street, and it's actually covered a whole lot of a street. The whole street went, arcades, shops went right under. So none of those are been able to reoperate again. They've all had to move away and shut the whole arcade, and that's my own family arcade. So that's been really badly affected. And not only Taree, but the surrounding of Taree, which is, Cundall Town, Chatham, Oxley Island, Jamaica Island, Glenthorne, all these, Tenoni, Wingham. Wingham, it's been cut off. They lost their bridge. So now there's only one way into Wingham and one way out is the same road. There's none of going back the short way. These people who lived in Hillville, who lived in Tenoni, they were able to go straight to Wingham, takes them 5 to 10 minutes. Now they come around to Taree to go back to Wingham. And they're still left with no bridge. They're still not sure what's the government doing about it. They have formed a support group for all these people that had lost their homes and their businesses, and they're trying to see what the government can do to help because they cannot go back to their home. This is the worst flood in the 500 they've had. So it's been, unfortunately, I was coming home on the weekend of the flood and the road was cut off, so I couldn't get home. But luckily, people were taking photos from my own home, from our own veranda, with the flood down our, back to our shed sort of thing, down from our property. So we were one of the lucky ones that we didn't get flooded because the house quite high. But the neighbours underneath us, right on the riverbank, they all lovely homes and they all got flooded. So there's people not even back to their homes now. They're still living in caravan. They're still living in community centres. Their people are accommodating them in their own home till they work out what they're going to do with their own. So this is the effect that it's taken on us. It came too quick for the community to be able to do anything. Talking about the army, we did have the army came in. They had to get them in because there was too much damage to the properties, to the people, to save people. We had lost homes just floating down the river, whole houses, like 2-3 homes, not even thinking about the animals that floated down the river, and boats, you name it, every, instruments, all sorts of things. So everybody's trying to get back on their feet again and see what they can do to help the town to build up again. But where do they go from here? How are they going to lift these houses on the mouth of the river? And it's not only, as I said, the business in Taree, but it's the surrounding, because the Manning River is a huge river, very big, very wide. So it covers quite in a way that goes around and get to Harrington and then get into the sea through Old Bar. So it's quite fascinating. And I'm sorry, if I had time or more information, I would have got some clips for you and showed you. But because I'm going and coming from the area at the moment with my husband not being well, so that was the best I could get for you. So I hope that helps as well. So I'm really interested, and it was interesting that I was coming home last week, and there was a guy on the train with me, and he looked at me and he said, "I know you." And I thought, where? He's Lebanese. I know him from somewhere. Then I jotted my memory, and it was one of the guys, which Emil will probably know, the Trad family. Yeah, the Trad family, we did a history on them, myself and another gentleman, Peter Dada, when council wanted to commemorate the Lebanese and the Manning. And they asked me if I'll be able to help. And I got Peter Dada because he's good with paperwork and computer, and he's been in the area for, his family 100 years. So I asked him, we both got together and we helped council to do some history on the Lebanese in the valley. And the Trad family were one of the first one, 1863. We went back to them, and but now he was telling me on the train, when he realized who I was, that I was the person who helped, he said, "Oh, I've got more history for you." And 1848, they've gone back more, and
Would
their
be
own,
the earliest.
yeah, the earliest that he could ever find. So he's been involved with this history for his family. And I was quite surprised. I said, well, send me something so we can add it to your records, because all the display of the history I did on the Lebanese in the valley, it's gone when Frida and Paul were in charge of the society, and Paul were doing all the digital, taking all the photos into digital. So they've got all that, and I thought I could add that to it, to their history. So that was interesting. I thought, oh, can you send me something? So there was, I haven't seen this guy for about 15 years. And so it was interesting. He's still in here, and he was telling me how the family who's died and who's still alive and all this sort of thing. But to go back to 1848 or 43, I can't remember when he told me. It was in the 40s. So that was interesting that we've had.
Munira, I gotta say that Anne and I are shaking our heads because there weren't any Lebanese in Australia in 1848. I think he's got his dates mixed up.
Well, I
I've
just wondered, Anne, I was going to ask
researched
you.
that family, and I have the early records of that family.
So what's the earliest
They
you
don't
had?
go back that early.
That's what I thought, Anne, but then I didn't want to say anything. I said, well, send me something.
If he sends you something, then we will have evidence. So
yeah, well, that'll be good. Yeah, if he does, well, I definitely will send it through to you. So thank you anyway.
Thank you, Munira, for the snapshot
Yes.
of the floods in Taree. And Anne Thacker, can I say on behalf of everyone who's present and on behalf of the ALHS, thank you so much for such an enlightening and fascinating presentation. I think it was very informative for all of us. For those who are not members of the ALHS, I encourage you to become members.
Yeah.
We research and record history, and members get regular updates and discounts on various items, events, publications, etc. So I'd encourage you to join. And with that, we've gone over time by 10 minutes, so I apologize for that. But thank you, everyone, for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at the next meeting.
Yeah, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Yusuf.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you,
was a
Anne.
Thank
pleasure.
you.